right to one of the best duck hunts that we had out here on the old beaver pond. It was a late season mallard hunt, probably early November. This was our first time hunting this late in the season because the pond would freeze over and it would limit the amount of water that you could hunt over. And also a lot of times when it starts to freeze over, the wood ducks would move out. But we decided to give it a try. It was a full moon night, and we got out here, and the moon was just as bright as it could be, and it was just glowing off of the water. The water actually had a mist rising from it because the pond was half frozen, and so this mist from the cool air over the ice, it was just misting up, and the moon just doubled it. It just made it glow. So we took it, we launched a small boat, and I went out in the boat first, push poling, which was standing up in it with a long pole, and I broke probably about a 50-foot to a 75-foot wide alleyway in front of the blind so that we could put the decoys out because it was froze over. Back then, most of the time when we hunt this, it's got lily pads on it, but the lily pads were starting to die because of the frozen water. So I broke this alleyway out, and by making all that noise, some geese at the far end of the pond did jump up, and they flew over us, but it was still before daylight. It was before shooting hours, but it was nice to hear. So we got the area broken over. I went out and I put the decoys out, and then I came back, and Jim and I went and paddled back out to the blind and got set up. Jim was hunting the far end of the blind, which we called Killer's Corner, because the ducks pass on the far end between the blind and that far bluff, and so the guy on that side gets the first shot at him. So it was still dark, and we could hear mallards calling, flying above us. It was really neat. We could hear them, but we couldn't see them. Sure enough, normally we would fix ourselves a cup of coffee and sit out there, and we shake hands and we tell each other good morning, and then load up right at start of shooting hours. Well, right off the bat, a flock of mallards came in through our decoys, and Jim picked up and he knocked down a really nice drake, and I picked up with my gun, and it went click. So that means that the gun was jammed up and the firing pin was jammed up. I don't know whether I had ice in there from transporting it out there with water on top of it, and it froze, but my gun wouldn't work. So meanwhile, there's mallards flying all over the place. So Jim made a couple of good shots here and there, and all I could do was keep trying with my gun desperately, and I was pretty frustrated. And then so finally, after about 2 hours, things slowed up a little bit. Well, Jim offered for me to use his gun. So we sat there for, I want to say, about an hour. Well, in comes a large flock of mallards, I guess about 20 or 25. And boy, you could sure pick those nice green heads out from those drakes. They passed to my right, and I let them go, even though they were in gun range, because I wanted them to turn and come towards us. Well, when they came through the second time, I picked the biggest drake out in the front of the leader of the pack and shot. And when he fell, he busted actually a hole in the ice. That's how big he was. Then the birds climbed up above us, and I picked out the next biggest drake that I could see and shot. And when I shot, you could see the feathers just puff out away from him, and then they just kind of glid down. And he broke a hole in the ice also. He beat him down. It took the feathers about 5 minutes to get down to the water. And so that was fairly rewarding there. We sat and hunted and talked about old stories and stuff like that for another I want to say another hour, hour and a half. And then I got out the boat and went and retrieved all the ducks, which was quite an undoing because it froze over where I was at. And actually the decoys started to freeze into the water. And they even had, when I threw them out, the water dripping off of the beaks started to freeze. So each of the decoys had little icicles coming off of the beaks. But it was really a fun hunt because, we never hunted that late here in the season, and it was really just fun to be out with my hunting buddy, drinking warm coffee and having some success. We picked them all up, and I was even though I only got two, but I made two really good shots. I kind of was thinking that after 35 years or 40 years of duck hunting, I finally all came together. But it was a great hunt. When I did pick those ducks, they were really, really fat. They had good plumage on them. I got some good feathers, and used them for fly time and stuff like that. So that was one of the best hunts we had out here. I had hunted all day on Saturday, which was the opening day, and I only seen about 3 deer, and they were does, and I was getting fairly desperate to at least see a buck. So I came out to my stand again Sunday morning, and I got out extra early because I wanted to get here so that I wouldn't spook anything out prior to shooting hours. And I wanted to try to slip in and get in here as quiet as I could. So I gave myself plenty of time to get into the blind. Well, it was just breaking day, and it was just kind of that transition between the grays and the black to when you could see outlines and shapes. And I guess probably about 20 minutes after daylight, or sunrise, which gave me plenty of shooting light to see it, I looked up the trail here to the left, and about, I want to say 100 yards out, walking straight towards me, was a buck. And I put my scope on him, and I had to look really close because he was carrying himself like a buck. Because actually bucks and does do walk differently. Both does are more, I want to say, curvy, and bucks have more angles to them. And bucks also are not as wary as does. They're walking, and they're trying to get to where they want to head to. Well, this one was headed straight towards me, and I scoped it, and I counted 4 points on one side, but there was no horn on the left side. So I realized then that I was hunting a unicorn. So he was kind of hesitantly walking towards me, step by step, and it took him about, I want to say, a good 15 minutes to where he was about 50 yards out. And he turned ever so slightly. A head-on shot is not a very good shot to take on a deer. And I was waiting, and I was following him in the crosshairs of the scope with the crosshairs on his chest, right where the white hair meets the brown. And I didn't want to take that shot, and I was going to wait until he tried to turn broadside to me. Well, he took another 2 steps, and he took one of them to his right, and that turned quartering towards me, so it gave me kind of a shot at his shoulder. And just at that moment, he looked straight at me. And when he looked straight at me, we made eye contact. And I knew that it wasn't wasn't going to be another second. It was just going to be a breath away from him taking off running. And so I took a breath, exhaled, and then squeezed the shot. And when I shot, he jumped straight up, and he took off in a run where he ran to the left. It was really a sprint. And then the woods got quiet instantly. I knew that he was close enough, and I had a good shot at him, and I knew that I hit him. But it's just, you just don't knock him down and kill him right instantly. So, my heart was beating really, really fast. And just like it is with that adrenaline surge right at that one moment. But you don't really feel contented until you walk up on the deer. And so there's always that anxiety between when you shoot them and when you recover them. So the scary or the neat thing about it was that I did make the shot, and I did see a buck on the second day. So I eased out of my blind. I never really get into a hurry to go chase after them. I always take my time, and I go first thing to the place where I shoot them. And there, I did notice some white hair, so I did shoot him a little low. But there was good blood. I walked over, and probably about 40 yards over the next hill, next rise, he was dead there. So he died on his feet. It was a good shot, nice clean kill, and it was pretty rewarding. And he still only had one horn. It was 4 shots, 4 points on one side. My best deer hunt centers around killing a 10 point. Just to set the stage, I was hunting on some private land, and I was kind of an outsider to the group. So they gave me really a poor spot to hunt. So setting up my deer stand, I noticed that there was a scrape line where a buck was passing through, sometimes probably nocturnal, because the spot that they gave me was a little patch of pine trees, which was just adjacent to a gated area where employees would come in every morning to this compressor station. So they would come in the morning and then leave in the afternoon, and so naturally this area was heavy with human scent. So, I didn't anticipate that much, or I noticed that the deer signs that I was seeing was probably nocturnal. So, anyway, this was the hand I was dealt with. So I went about 3 weeks before the season, found the best tree out of this patch of pine trees to put my deer stand in. I did notice that the scrape line was active, so the buck was using it. However, I felt pretty confident that he was using it at night, which would have been, I wouldn't have ever been able to see him. So I set my stand up probably about, I want to say 15 foot up in a pine tree, where I could climb it without having to, I could climb the branches up the pine tree to get into the stand. So I could get in there fairly quiet. So that morning, it was opening day of bow season. It was in the middle of the week, and there was no other hunters hunting, and it was misting rain. So I could tell which way the wind was blowing, so I came in from the road, which was actually a much longer walk than coming in from the field, where if I came in the field, it would have been a 5-minute walk to my stand. But I kind of had a feeling that if he was going to be in the field, I didn't want to spook him. So I walked in from the west, from the road, got into my stand extremely quiet, and this was before daylight. I was there a half hour before daylight. So I'm sitting there, and I could hear the employees from this compressor station coming in and out of the gate. I could hear their conversations. I could see the lights of their vehicles. And I just sat there, and sure enough, daylight came, and I noticed a large-bodied deer walking towards me. He was naturally coming from behind me. He was quiet as a mouse. And meanwhile, vehicles and people are still talking at the compressor station. And he had that sneak type of approach down pat, because he knew he could slip through that little patch of woods, go lay down in a thicket in a field, and no one would ever see him, because it was a cornfield. So I was sitting there waiting. I saw him, and I could see it was legal shooting time, but it was still dark because of the rainy conditions. He walked underneath me, and I could see he was a well-racked deer, and he was a big one. And all I had time for was to pick up and shoot. I could see my sights. I shot, and I broke his back, and he fell straight down. He lifted his head up, and by that time I shot another arrow and got him right in the heart on the second shot. And it took him like 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and he laid down dead. So he was right underneath me. I didn't have to track him or anything. Meanwhile, the rest of the employees had went into their shop, and they were already doing their daily work. And I pulled my truck up. I was using a little Ranger then. I had a nice easy drag because I could drive right to my stand. And I dragged him and drug him up into the back of the bed, and then I could realize how big he really was. I could barely get him into the back of the pickup. So he wound up being a really massive, for me, the biggest deer I've ever killed. And I could tell that he was an old buck. So he was probably doing this sneak tactic for a long time. The only problem today, the day that I got him, was he was about 15 minutes late from his normal trek. He was late to go into bed, and that was all the edge that I needed. So that was my most memorable deer.